Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Father Tom Eckert, and I'm the director of the Holy Cross Mission Center, and I just want to welcome you all here. It's a great occasion, a great day to be able to celebrate with you, and I would say let's just take a moment. I'm sure you have already said grace before taking bites of those delicious morsels this morning, but let us begin with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, we ask that you be with us today as we celebrate the Centennial of the Holy Cross Mission Center. We ask that you bless those who will be speakers and sharing their word and their experience with us. We ask that you continue to enliven our hearts for the mission of the church and especially within the congregation of Holy Cross. We ask your blessings, Lord, upon all those areas in the world where Holy Cross ministers, the sisters and brothers and priests who minister to the communities, and those communities that they may be filled with joy. We ask your blessing through Christ our Lord. Amen. So again, my name is Father Tom Eckert. I am starting my 4th year as the director of the Holy Cross Mission Center. And long ago, one of the reasons that I was interested in coming to the congregation of Holy Cross was my experience of the Holy Cross priests and brothers on campus here at the University of Notre Dame. In particular, there was one of our priests who is now a bishop, Father Bishop Patrick Neary, who had spent time in Latin America, and that was a true love of mine. And so I ended up spending about 2 years in just outside of Lima, Peru, and Santiago de Chile, working in our schools and our parishes there. But enough about me, more about the Mission Center. So I'd like to welcome you all this morning and thank you for joining us for this Centennial celebration, Encountering Christ on the Global Peripheries. I would like to take a moment also and just thank all of those who continue to help make this day and all of our works possible. Father Bill Leese is our provincial, and as a ministry and work of the U.S. province, I would like to thank him for his continued support and guidance in the vision and direction for the Mission Center. And today I would also like to invite those who are co-sponsoring our events throughout the day. The Mendoza College of Business and Dean Martin Kremers, who is here. The Keough School of Global Affairs and their Dean, Scott Appleby. The De Nicola Center for Ethics and Culture with their director, Carter Sneed. The Center for Social Concerns and the director, whom I met this morning. Thank you, Suzanne Shanahan, for being with us. The Notre Dame Campus Ministry and Father Pete McCormick, and also the University of Notre Dame Department of Theology. And it's been a great thing to have their support. My friends, some of you know Holy Cross very well and have been to our missions. Some of you are coming, and this is kind of your first introduction. So my remarks are broad and brief. Maybe it's past that point, as I will then introduce our first speaker. But the work of Holy Cross Mission Center, broadly speaking, is to, since its inception in 1923, has been to train people to serve in and to provide support for the international works of Holy Cross. And the history of the Mission Center, now spanning 100 years, includes hardship and challenge, joy and hope, and great dedication to service of God and neighbor. When I first entered the congregation of Holy Cross, we were taken our postulant year to visit the Holy Cross Mission Center, which has always had its home in the seminary. And so we went in and met the director, then Jim Ferguson, and a wonderful assistant director, Father Arnold, or Gus Fell. And as Gus described it, he said, yes, I was interim Mission Center director. They asked me if I would do this, for a short time, for a year. And he said, that was 43 years ago. So hopefully we will have this tenure as well. But I've been blessed to serve in this capacity now, as I said, for 3 full years and have learned a great deal about our history, and there is still so much more to learn and share. A couple of historical kind of dates and pieces just to put our day in context. In 1919, the Bishop Allarding of Fort Wayne recommended the formation of the Bengal Foreign Mission Society to the Congregation of Holy Cross. And that was in part in response to the decimation of the church after World War I in Europe. And so this was a way to help the church continue to grow and evangelize in the farther reaches of the world. In 1923, a date that we celebrate today, Father Michael Mathis began as the director of the newly officially opened Bengal Foreign Mission Society, and that later was changed to the Holy Cross Foreign Mission Society. In 1924, there was a dedication of a foreign mission seminary in Washington, D.C. to continue to prepare and send missionaries. And then in the 30s, during and after the Great Depression, the road work began. So priests would travel around the U.S. to raise funds for the missions. They utilized silent movies, kind of talkies, and we haven't been able to find any of those extant. So if you have any or know where they might be, please let us know. But over the following decades, we were able also not only to be in Bangladesh, but in areas of East Africa and Latin America as well. And we have many great men who have gone before us that we will speak a little bit more about later in the day. And so, my friends, I want to continue just simply saying there is so much more to the history of Holy Cross around the world and of the Mission Center itself. And we realize in Holy Cross that we can and must do a better job in sharing our stories, the joys and the challenges of our history in the Mission Center, and we're using that as the starting point today. We also hope that we will continue to form these relationships with different departments and groups and areas, not only here on campus, but in all of our ministries. And I'm so very grateful to folks that we will mention again later who have come in from St. Edward's University and Holy Cross College across the street, and others as far away as Bangladesh and East Africa. So without further ado, and Dr. Wu said to keep it brief, so I used very small print instead. So I am pleased now to introduce to you our first speaker, an author, an international leader in the Catholic Church, humanitarian efforts, and higher education, a wife, a mother of two, and a longtime support of the Congregation of Holy Cross. Dr. Carolyn Wu has a Ph.D. in strategy from Purdue University, where she went on to become a faculty member and administrator, earning recognition as one of the top 40 leaders under 40 by Change magazine. From 1997 until 2011, Dr. Wu served as the Dean of Mendoza College of Business here at the University of Notre Dame, focusing on teaching quality, curriculum innovation, and ethics integration. Under her leadership, Mendoza achieved the top-ranking undergraduate program from Bloomberg and BusinessWeek. As the first female chair of AACSB International, she spearheaded the Principles for Responsible Management with the United Nations. In 2012, Dr. Wu embraced a new challenge as the CEO of Catholic Relief Services, a global organization providing humanitarian relief and sustainable development in over 100 countries. Under her guidance, CRS implemented a wide range of programs spanning emergency relief, microfinance, health, education, empowerment, peace building, and more, impacting millions of lives annually. And since her tenure at CRS, since it concluded in 2016, Dr. Wu has been active on a number of boards and in coordinating the Vatican dialogues on energy transition, which brings together industry leaders and the Holy Father in a transformative conversation. So we are honored to have her with us today for her presentation, Hope in Action, Work for a Better World. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Wu.
It really is a privilege to be with you. It feels like being home, being with family. I consider CSC Notre Dame just really part of our family. Our sons were raised here, and I see so many old friends and faces. Before I go any further, I just want to thank Father Tom Eckert and Benjamin, but particularly Mike Jesuit, who is truly working tirelessly behind this and comprehensively. I don't think that Michael leaves anything to chance. And I just want to say, when I prepared this, one of my primary concern was I would never want to depreciate Mike's work because he really went through a lot to do this. Now, Mike would have liked a text from me a week ago, okay? And I have to assure him, I don't have text. Like I have this. They come in different colors and so on, but, something will happen and I will give my best to it. But anyway, so all success goes to the team, Father Tom, Mike, Benjamin, and I accept whatever the flaws are. I just want to say I'm really very honored and humbled to be at this moment in the CSC history. This is a marker, right? 100 years of the work of the CSC mission overseas. And actually, as I study some of the documents, the work of CSC overseas actually started in 1850s. You were in Bengal, which is today's Bangladesh. The 1923 is when the foreign mission is formally and legally established. But 7 years before then, shortly after the formation of the congregation, it was already overseas in Bengal. And so we're talking about 170 years of work. And during that period of time, it started in Bengal, and then it broadened. At some point, the foreign mission was in the Philippines, it was in India, and then it went to Peru, it went to Panama, it went to Chile. So, Asia, and then Central and South America, and then it went to Africa, which is Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda. I think started with Uganda. So, not just 100 years, but almost 200 years, 170 years of work and commitment and ministries. And I just want to say, sometimes when we look back, particularly standing this point in time, we feel like the world was a simpler time, simpler place, but it really wasn't. From 1850 to now, there have been 60 wars, not to mention the number of economic upturns and downturns. And of those 60 wars, there were some big ones: World War I, World War II, the American Civil War. But actually, this commitment was sustained through a lot of turmoil in the external environment, which is something to remember. So today we stand in this point in time. I think part of it is to recognize and celebrate that achievement. I think another task is to state our appreciation. The people who came before us, they laid these paths, they laid these foundations, and we are here. We make a connection to the people who come before us, the work that they did. The Chinese has a saying, which is, if you don't understand where you come from, you would not know where you're going. So I think today is a day to step back and to sort of keep in mind where we have come from, who are the people who made it possible, and what does that mean for the future. When Mike talked to me about today and what I would like to talk about, and the first thing that came to mind was, of course, hope. Hope is the signature of the CSC. Ave Cruz, Spes Unica. Hail Cross, our only hope. So it's about hope, it's about the cross. And of course, we are part of a capital campaign. And the tagline for that campaign is Holy Cross, men with hope to bring. So I just wanted to hearken back to what is the essence of the Congregation of Holy Cross. So my talk today is about hope. And, this is a time where people generally say, what should we be hopeful about? With a great degree of skepticism. When I went to work for CRS, leaving Notre Dame, which is unthinkable, people just did not leave Notre Dame in those days. And people would ask me, do you really think that these problems can be addressed? And later on, as I run into people, they would ask me, are you depressed? Are you depressed? Because on behalf of CRS, which is the work of the Catholic Church in the United States, it's formed by the bishops, but it represents the friendship and the efforts of the American church overseas. We serve about 130 million people each year in over 100 countries. They're not countries that you would usually go to for vacation, but they're countries where people have the most needs. And Tom here too is now a member of the foundation board of CRS and goes and sees his work, which is quite amazing. But I generally find that people who do work in this area, they don't ask that question. They don't ask the question, why are you depressed? But people who are watching TV, reading newspapers, they have been solicited as donors, they are the one who ask the questions. Well, really, sort of like different versions of being nice from, are you depressed? To saying like, is this work futile? Like, so immense. Are you just a good-hearted sucker? I mean, they don't put it in so many words, but that's the underlying sentiment. And I want to answer this with 3 points. The first one is, but before I get to those points, I just want to say when people say, problems are never solved, they keep coming back. I get these solicitations over and over again. So one thing I want to disabuse people of is that there is no progress. That there is no progress. We just keep working on these things and there is no progress. So just some sense, there is a global health index which really takes in not just income, but education and health of countries. For the 20 years between the year 2000 and the year 2020 on an index basis, it has gone up from about 65 to 76. So kind of like a 10-point, 11-point increase in those 20 years, which is about half a point each year, which if you think about it, is quite amazing, to be able to climb that index, steadily. And I just want to say right now, the last 2 years, the index has fallen. After 20 years of steady rise, it has fallen because of COVID, all the responses to COVID, the Ukraine war, and we're back to like 2016 level. But never mind, progress and improvement is never linear. It's not like, the world happens, things happen. But the fact that collectively, the world has been able to make some improvements in the life of people, I don't think you can ignore this. In the process, child mortality in these 20 years have dropped by about 50%, which is quite a lot. The people who have access to clean water, drinkable water, has grown by 2 billion. There are still 2 billion people in the world where the water is unreliable. But a progress of 2 billion people getting clean water is not like, it just happened. I mean, it took a lot of work. It took 20 years. The adult literacy rate, which means that people are able to read at some level of sort of capacity to make decisions about their life. They could read numbers. They could do a few sort of transactions, has gone from about 82% to about 86% in terms of functional literacy. 4 percentage point. Is this what we write home about, 4 percentage point? But the bottom line is that when people say, it's just 1%. 1% of the global population is 80 million people, right? So we could sort of armchair and say, all this work, doesn't make any difference. So I just want to say, first of all, the progress of the collective work of aid workers, agencies like CRS, but governments and local governments. I just want to say we tend to be sort of skeptical and cynical about the work of governments, and I have seen so many people who really put themselves into it. But going back to why I have hope, what gives you hope? The first is that the people whose lives are being made better. we're not talking about statistics. I just met a few people yesterday for dinner, and they talked about the family they work with. The Afghan father now has a good job with good benefits. There's a lady, and I think that Marlene works with this, a Latino lady who were brought here by Coyote. Now she can work. She has a work permit, and now she can work at Notre Dame full-time with benefits. Well, those people are not reading statistics. They're not saying X% decline or Y% increase, you should do more work. They say, you made it possible for me and my family to have a future. This woman has a daughter in high school who came with her, and she still has other children in Central America for which she is paying to bring them here. This Afghan father has 8 children, and it is their lives. So when you look at the people, and the people who are receiving this, the assistance, the empowerment, you look at them, and that's why you have hope. I have a few stories to tell. David went on his first trip with me, my husband, and I think we were in Guatemala. We went to so many different countries. And we visited a farmer. His name is Ernesto. Ernesto has a little farm. He used to grow corn. And he told us the corn was doing so poorly, and there's climate change issues, there is poor soil issues, and he could not keep up with his payments. And by the way, some of these loans that farmers get, they are 12% interest a month. So when they don't make it, they really don't make it. They lose their farm, they lose their animals, and then they become day workers. Basically, they just walk from farm to find a job. Ernesto was on the brink of that happening to him. Whenever he hears a motorcycle, he would go to hide, because only the people who work in the bank collecting debt has motorcycle. And so whenever he hears a motorcycle, he would go to hide just so that he could delay another day, the quote-unquote inevitable. At that point, CRS, working with USAID, had introduced a program, and we were asking people to register for that program. And the program was to change your crops, to go from corn and maize, which has very little value, because everybody else is also growing corn and maize. And if your particular harvest is not good, you are dead. So, but people don't want to change. Their father, their grandfather, their great-grandfather had all grown crops, corn. So to change to a new crop was just really very risky. They didn't know what to do with it. And the new crop would be passion fruit. Right? But passion fruit has very high cash value. It is used for export. You go to all these juice bars, they have passion fruit. So Ernesto finally went to sign up for this program to learn how to grow passion fruit. To make the story short, the first year, this program provided the seed without cost, and all the tutorial assistance, basically shoulder to shoulder with Ernesto to grow passion fruit. Well, he made enough money. It was a good year. But then they decided, he working with the program said, if we start the seedling in a greenhouse instead of in a field, we could increase our harvest from 75%. And so they didn't know what percentage it would go to, but they knew that the field was a more hostile environment than the lab, than the greenhouse. So they started this. They had seedling. They grew it under the greenhouse, and they grew it to about 3 inches, and then they planted it in the field, and the harvest percentage went from 75% to 95%. In the process, when you grow it in the lab, you have to have a medium. You have to have soil. And actually, you have to have very rich soil to support that. Well, rich soil comes from manure and earthworms, and they tilt the soil and they aerate it, but they also leave their waste there, but it has to start with, the produce from the animals. So the women of that community came together to start a business. Their business was to collect cow manure. And there was a cash value for that. And they put it into these huge vats. You know, these rooms are like, these greenhouses are like 2 length of this particular room. They have these wooden vats, basically, of the soil that was enriched by the products of these women, and it generated earthworms that aerated it. I'm a city girl, but I learned all of these things. So it became a business and a livelihood for these women, all right? So they have that, and they found out how successful it was, so greenhouse became essential part of this. Then Ernesto also learned that they don't need chemicals. You could imagine there were a lot of chemical salesmen, fertilizers, pesticides, and so on. And actually, it was a very high percentage of their cost was going to these chemicals. And he understood that they didn't need those chemicals at all. They were overusing it, and now because they have the rich soil and so on, you know, they knew how to manage it, so he cut out the use of chemicals. Because of all the success, he started teaching the rest of the community. They started putting up greenhouses. They had to learn how to finance greenhouses. And now they have a revenue and income stream to show bankers what you could do and that people could get the loans to do their greenhouses. He became very successful. Number of things. His children were able to go to universities and they became agri-economists and also understand sort of soil science and production. He now owns 2 motorcycles. All right? And, you know, he tells the story, but the beautiful thing is that he became kind of like the leavening agent for the rest of his community. I want to tell another story about communities of women. This is also in El Salvador or Guatemala or one of those areas where we were working with communities to make sure that they get water. So the government had provided water and access to water pipes and so on, but there was no access to the little farms. You know, these are rural areas, some of them are in the mountains, and so they essentially had no access to water except to go to the riverbeds or the creek beds to get their water. So to think about how to install pipes under the soil, you have to think about financing. How do you finance that? How do you maintain that? How do you work with the community so that it would be equitable who gets the pipes nearest to them, you know? Would everyone start getting those? Having worked through all of those problems, and about 3 years after the project was in place, I went to visit with them. By the way, their way of welcome was to lay out pine needles. Just that, they don't have carpets, but they have pine needles to show welcome to a guest. And the pine needles, of course, were really sort of the scent was so welcoming. We were in nature. They had the welcome carpet of pine needles for me. And I asked them about their lives. So having worked out how you finance water pipes, which is the same principle as a mortgage, right? And buttressed by the fact that they would have increased income. So they talked about water allows them to really be productive in their crops. So first of all, they were able to sustain the health and the nutrition of their own children and family. The second thing is that these excess crops have cash value, so they increase their income. All of a sudden, they have access to income. Because they have now clean water, they don't have to rely on dirty water, which gives you all sorts of terrible illnesses, you know, dysentery and all those bad things. And also going down to the riverbed, sometimes they have fights, and sometimes they fall and they have injuries and so on. So it's safer, the water is clean, they're healthier. They also have more time, and so they don't have to go to the riverbeds 2 hours a day, and some of them actually learned. In another community, in a Muslim community, I think we were in Afghanistan, I asked the group that, you know, met with us, who also had water access. I said, how do you use your time? And the men of the community said, our women are learning to read And I said, why is reading important for the women? And the men said, so that they could read the Quran. And also that they could bathe and clean before they attend prayers. This was in Afghanistan. But back to Guatemala, back to Central America, these women, they were just beaming. So they have more income, they have more time, they do craft, they learn literacy. And because now they formed themselves into a community, they started learning all sorts of things. Should we have solar lantern? What are some of the vaccinations that they should use? How do they make certain food in a way that maintains a nutritional value? So they became a learning group together. And the more interesting thing is they're no longer beaten by their husbands. Somehow they gain respect. Now, this is just a simple thing of water. And the final little story about this is, I think I was in Greece. It was in the time of the Syrian war. There were a lot of migrants and refugees, and that went on. This whole migration took 3 or 4 years, people going in. Greece was actually at that point in an economic downturn. It was having all of the debt problems that it couldn't finance. But it opened its doors and it provided like free transportation to Syrian refugees and so on. But there were lots of them. Some of them were getting settled. And one day I was in our office in Greece and they said, somebody wants to see me. It would be just a short meeting. And there was this man who brought in a baby. The baby was born in Greece. He was a Syrian refugee. He has found a job. I think he was a carpenter or something like this. And he said he wanted to meet me and show me this baby who is born in this wonderful environment. They're no longer being bombed in Syria. And that his wife are just really sort of excited to have this new life in their new home. And they have named the daughter Caritas. Caritas. So Caritas is used widely in the Catholic world. It means love and charity. You have Caritas India, Caritas Kenya, Caritas Greece, Caritas Syria. It's really sort of like Catholic charities in the US, which would be Caritas in other countries. And he said, we name her Caritas in thanksgiving for all the people who have reached out to us, regardless of the differences in our religion. So when you look into the faces of the people you help, they are the ones who give us hope. Yes, terrible things are happening elsewhere, but there are other people in those places who hopefully are also attending to them. The Afghan father who could now feed his 8 children, the Central America woman now who has paid off the coyotes, have a daughter in high school here and applying for other children to come. That's another story. And so I just want to say that's what gives me hope. The next thing I want to say is another question is of this kind. You must have seen terrible things, right? We go into war-torn situations and just conflicts and groups killing each other, and they say, you must have seen a lot of terrible things. How do you deal with that? So I just want to say, one of the things I've done is that I've gone to more sort of genocide museums than I wish to count in a lot of different countries. They're always sobering. So on a mass scale, it's just sort of like feel that violence. And of course, a lot of natural disasters that wipe out people's life and livelihoods and homes and children and so on. You used to think that these are natural disasters, but actually we know it's also related to the consequences of how we live, our lifestyle, and so on. But there's nothing worse than just pure human cruelty. We have been in places where the way to win is to drive people off their land, because when they don't have land, they don't have cattle, they don't have crops, they don't have a livelihood, and eventually they die. And it starts with the children. I've been in places after the Yazidis. You might recall the Yazidis who were, really persecuted by ISIS. I met this woman. She stayed in this little hut provided for her. She generally would not come out and meet with people, but because I was a woman and I was there, she agreed to meet with me. She saw her husband and all her sons shot to death, and all her daughters were taken away, probably as prostitutes. And she was just there by herself. I met with a woman, and she decided that, it was in the Middle East area. I think she was Syrian. She decided that she wanted to get a job and to go outside of her home to work, which culturally for her family was unacceptable. And her husband threw acid at her for wanting to leave the home to work. And her own family also disowned her because she dishonored them. It's always hard for me to forget a young boy, about 14 or so, tall and lanky. We were in Palestine. There was a bombing. The father had cancer. They lost their home. It became a hole. There was a sofa in a hole that survived somehow. And this boy had a stomach as large as a soccer ball. And he had shrapnel in his intestines. So for those of you, when you have stomach distress and you reach for Pepto-Bismol, there's no relief for that type of pain. And there was no way he could be taken to a hospital. He's a Palestinian youth. There's actually no cure for shrapnel in the intestines unless it's an operation to remove it. He was just in pain. And there was nothing we could do for him. So I just want to say I've been in really dark places. I have to say, for myself, a question which is totally not totally answered yet is our hope is in the cross. I understand it when we encounter people who are suffering and we decide to pick up the cross and help them. That is our salvation. That is what it means. Our hope is in the cross. And that is we have to sort of pick up the cross and eventually pick up the cross with joy. But when you face people who suffer like that, the Yazidi woman who has nothing, this boy who has nothing, and I ask a question, I would say, Jesus, what does it mean for these people that the hope is in the cross? I'm sure they meet Jesus, in these moments. But, this is the mystery that I pray over and I don't have an answer to. So on some dimensions I do, on some dimensions I don't. But in the midst of these type of sufferings, I always also remember incredible kindness and goodness and generosity. Actually, you don't have to stretch imagination. A lot of times when people ask me, our world is so polarized, it's so divided, none of the policies make sense, we can't even pass a budget, the people do it for bad reasons, and so on, how terrible. And I always ask them, it seems like none of these people make any sense or do it for the good of other people. But in your own life, in your own personal circles, do you see people who are good, who are caring, who reach out to other people, who have this sense of decency, who have this sense of what is right? Can you name those people? And I could tell you, they cannot stop naming those people. So I think in the midst of sort of like this sense of like, oh my Lord, everything is falling apart, is to remember incredible goodness. We had a staff member whose husband and 3 children were kidnapped by ISIS. They were actually kept for a year. Our staff member's name is Carolyn, the same name that I have, and she works on trauma, works with children with trauma from the war in Syria. Her husband, after a year, and the children, they were all fine, even though there were close calls. when he was released, he said, I always wanted revenge. Every day I thought about how I would get back at these people. And then he said, I don't want revenge anymore. I don't want any more violence and, getting a pound for a pound type of thing. And he actually got to know his captors. By the way, at one point, he told his captor who were trying to convert them, they're Christian. So he said, well, you can't convert me unless you understand the Bible. You need to read the Bible and tell me what's not right about that. And so his wife actually sent Bibles to that group. But anyway, he said, I just don't want revenge anymore. I don't approve of what was done, but I want love. His wife, who, when this first happened, for the first few days was catatonic. You could imagine. Her husband and her 3 children were gone. And when she slowly came back into it, and the first thing she said was, I want to go back to work. I want to attend to these children. I do not want to hate the Muslims. Right? That's that incredible goodness. I met a woman, I think we're now in Lebanon. She was trafficked. But she had this misfortune of being hit by a car and left unattended. She was just this person with no identity who was hit by a car, and she lost a leg, and she was put in the hospital for several months to recover and to learn how to use the prosthesis. But the traffickers don't want her anymore, right? They released her. She was of no value to them. And the first commitment she made was she wanted to use her life, and yes, missing a leg, that she wanted to use her life to help other trafficked women. And she became a staff member in our center. And every weekend she would cook up a storm to take it to the prisons. So out of that tragedy came this particular commitment. And just one little thing. We are working on a house. We are doing some construction work on a house at Union Pier. And there's a lead carpenter there. And he's definitely a Trumpster. He wears a Vote for Trump t-shirt. And when we go, he's a little conscious. He would put his hand over it so that we don't see it. He must have a sense that we are not Trumpsters. I don't know. We don't talk politics. But he was very self-conscious that he voted for Trump. And he would do like this. But he noticed that I was walking awkwardly. I'm just not an agile person, and construction sites are uneven and, up and down and that sort of thing, and David always has to help me and so on. He noticed that I had difficulty sort of walking, and immediately he built steps. He built steps for me, just because steps could help me. Now, look for them is 5 minutes of some planks and, some motor tools, and there are these steps. But he just recognized that, and he helped me with it. Now, his boss, who is our general contractor, he bills us, and he gives an hourly rate for him and his carpenter. And he pays his carpenter more than what he pays himself. He cites a higher rate for this carpenter. And the carpenter has no teeth. He is a young man, 40, 41, and he has no teeth. And I think dental work in this country is so ungodly expensive that your teeth is actually an indicator of social status. Those who could afford dental insurance and those who could not. So when I saw that, there's something in me who says, I wonder how he thinks about debt relief for students. I wonder what makes him vote for Trump. What did Trump stand for him in his life? And I was actually able to sort of imagine why this person who could not afford dental insurance would sort of see something. Don't ask me why, but anyway. But I began to sort of understand how he would interpret the different policies, given where he was. And to end this story, our general contractor really wants to pass his business to this carpenter. He's getting older and he has some health problems. He needs this carpenter to take courses, to get certified, which he's encouraging him to do. But one thing he wanted to give him was teeth. He felt like to be in business nowadays, that credibility, and he is paying for this carpenter to have dental work done. Now, I just want to share this is because, there's immense darkness in people and even in each of us, but there is also immense goodness. Goodness is the signature of God. Because we're made by God, we carry this signature of this goodness. And we have to remember it. I think right now we are polarized. We just want to win. We forget that to win, we have to win together. I think this is a time where the we and they are very pronounced, and they're fighting. We do have a lot of social changes. I think having the first Black president, for some of you maybe it's no big deal. Just another person with gifts and leadership. But for a lot of people, the sense of, we have our first Black president, and just, the need to sort of get through that. There's another thing where we always say in 10 years, 15 years, whatever it is, that Caucasians would be minority. The minority will be majority. Well, that's a big deal. That's not a small deal. That's like changing the whole identity of how we think about this country. I think all the cultural norms of how we look at sexual orientation, homosexuality, gender definition, you could imagine people really sort of, first of all, don't totally understand, don't totally sort of accept this, and sort of like maybe needing to fight it. And I think the whole climate crisis is actually an indictment about how we have lived. And you don't just go say, okay, all right, I guess didn't do a good job. It's a whole way of life that is being indicted. And I think all of these things, think about how first when Italians came or Irish came into this country, how many years did it take for that absorption and the assimilation to happen? It's really a 50, 60 years sort of journey. So we're now at the point where all of these redefinitions, and the major redefinitions, are coming at people. And so I think instead of just pulling our hair out and just pointing fingers or just, twisting our arms, is to really sort of understand how in our own circle we could reach out. We could really say, you are in my community. And what does that mean? I also want to say something about the CSC. I think goodness and generosity is not something that we read about. I think it's something that we learn from watching, and it's something we learn from having received it. If you've been the recipient of other people's generosity, you know that is real. When I watched Cassidy Hutchinson gave her testimony, she was the staff assistant who worked for Mike Meadows. She's the one who talked about, how there were these lies. And I thought, what is in a 26-year-old that gives her courage? And I think for me, it says, do I have courage? If I'm in those situations, would I do what she has done? We learn those things because other people do it. And they inspire us. And I think for CSC, it's how you treat the people you minister to. In the parishes, in the universities, in your own administration, because that's hope to bring, and that hope is the manifestation of that goodness. Let me go to my final point of why I don't give up. What gives me hope? In Haiti, after the earthquake, everything was in rubble. Everything was ruined. We spent the morning dealing with a lot of problem resolution. Just to give you a sense, well, all our rubble, how do we remove the rubbles? Because there's no heavy equipment. And there's no heavy equipment because there are no roads for this heavy equipment. Where would the rubbles go, even if we could remove them? Where do we remove them to? rebuilding for the people. Well, they live there as squatters. They have no land rights. You know, how do you build a home and say this is yours when the land is unaccounted for? And you know, you can imagine in Haiti, there's no ownership records. How do you do that? What are we going to build with? You know, and how can we afford that? That's just a fairly regular problem. But it's not just giving people homes. What about schools? You know, those communities will have to have schools for their children, and they will have to have livelihood. People have to be able to live, have an income, because in those days, people were living in camps, which are not healthy, but at least in camps, you don't have to worry about making a living or children going to school. How will we do that? There were just all these issues, and everything was sort of on a loose end, and, you know, from 8 to 2, you're just pretty much dead, just a whole sort of bucket of problems. So we now would go to the site where we actually have begun to do some other projects, you know, and there are resolutions to these issues. I won't go into it, but there are ways. So now we go to the field and go to see these new homes, and they are constructed according to UN standards that could withstand wind, and rain. Is very simple. It's a wood structure. It has concrete floor, and it has a metal roof. I walked into the house, the first house, and scribbled on the wall of the house is a message. And I'd like my colleagues to bring up the first photograph. On that wall, somebody had written, "God is good." I took this photograph. I couldn't believe it. All of a sudden, they didn't say CRS is good, or the Catholics are good, or Carolyn's good. The person wrote, "God is good." And it stopped me to remember that this is actually not my work. This is actually God's work. It is God's work, and we have a role to play in it. And we bring our human ingenuity and our problem solving into this. But it is God's work that we're doing. I think it's always to remember all things are possible with God, and that to have no hope is to give up on God. To have no hope is to say, this is beyond God. I don't think we could ever say that. And I want to bring up the second photograph. This hangs next to my desk in my studio. It was a message that was sent to me by Mary Miller Doyle, the wife of Brian Doyle. Many of you know Brian Doyle. He was a Notre Dame grad. He was a superb writer. He was the editor of the University of Portland magazine. He was much loved. He published many books. He died of cancer early. But Mary Miller Doyle sent me this message. In short, from Brian, I believe in believing, which I cannot read from this angle, which doesn't make sense, which gives me hope. That is Brian's proclamation of God. And that believing and hoping is really about knowing that God is present. So I just want to conclude. We started this remembering 170 years of work, 100 years of legal formation of the CSC Mission Center. But the most important thing is we stand at the precipice of the next 100 years. Over this long period of time, different people, the CSC brothers, fathers, and their lay collaborators have stepped up and said yes. And this is the moment, which is an invitation for each of us present to say, how will we say yes? And I said, if you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you will go. We know where we come from, and there is an equivalent question. Where will we go? What will we say yes to? God bless you. God bless you in your ministries, and thank you very much. Have a great day. questions or you ran out of time?
If you have a few minutes. So at this time, for those who might have some questions, I believe that Michael is going to be fielding those, and some of you might have used the QR code on those blue sheets to streamline it a little bit. Michael, would you?
Yes, please, if you have questions, you can direct them to Bridget. Bridget, could you raise your hand for us? Please take a moment to write down questions. I know we've gotten a few here digitally.
Michael is so organized, I'm not supposed to be up here right now. He has a microphone.
One question we have here, Dr. Wu, is about the intersection of your experience in international relief work and the faith of young people, particularly, I presume, like recent college graduates or volunteers who participated in this. How have you seen international relief work impact the faith lives of young people, especially young Catholics?
I actually think that young people nowadays are in a healthy space, even though they're not showing up at the dorm masses and so on, because I think young people have been so bombarded with a world with so many problems. I think they wanted to believe. They wanted not to believe in people, but to believe that there is real action, there is real care of people for their world. They see the whole climate crisis happening in front of them. And the climate crisis is created by the generation before them. I think they see all of those things and they want to believe and they want to see solution. What is healthy and what is unfortunate? What is healthy is that they don't look to institutions for that answer. They have been let down by institutions, whether there's the government or the institutional church, embroiled in all of the scandals for which it really hasn't taken full accountability for. The church has given various ways of teaching about sexual orientation, gender, and so on, but in a way where the message is about rule rather than it is about a loving way to live in this world. And so they could not turn to the church as an institution for those answers. They actually, all of them like to go and do international relief, not for their life, but for a period of time. I think what is unfortunate in the process when we say we lost a baby with the bathwater, along with the distrust of institution, is a lack of understanding of the sacramentality of God in the world. That message of how God lives with us and in this real world, and how God is in us, not just with us, but is in us. I think that whole catechesis formation is just not there. And I think that is the saddest part about the young people walking away from the church, because they're walking away from Christ's incarnation in each of us. And I don't know how you have hope. You know, as I say, the last thing is, if you don't have hope, you're giving up on God, but, so I think along with the institutional sort of distrust is that whole sacrament issue, which is not known. I think institutional distrust actually could be a lever for better change, right? And I think we see the church in some ways embracing some of that. I think the synod on synodality is an attempt on the part of the Pope, who says we need to listen to people. But I think the absence of a sense that God is real is tragic. And I think when we talk about the Holy Cross, spes unica, Ave Cruz spes unica, it's really and how you operate with, engage all the people you work with. It's through your work and through your goodness. It's to let people know how God is alive. And I think people come to a sense that God is with us and God is real and that God is love. It's through manifestation of how we work and how we live and how we engage each other. So that's my take on young people. This institutional skepticism can be rebuilt, could be a good lever. But I think the lack of understanding of Christ in us is tragic.
Thank you very much. I do think that our church has this special gift of being able to speak about the incarnation. So I think your work and CRS's work and Holy Cross Mission Center's work is an example of how we can make God present. Morgan asked a question that I think relates to some of these challenges that young people are feeling. How do you practice hope or inspire hope over long time frames of change without immediate improvements being visible in the short term?
I think faith, first of all, mandates action. If you just sit and watch TV and read the newspapers and try to have hope, I don't think that happens. I was yesterday just speaking to a high school student. He's the son of a Notre Dame alum. Actually, both parents are. And he is a sophomore. He's trying to work on a paper, and he asked a similar question like that. Clearly he can't go to Syria or Mexico or, Guatemala or whatever it is. And he says, how do you have hope in the midst of this? And I looked at him and I said, in your school, in your high school, just in your group, aren't there people who are marginalized, who are just not popular, who people don't spend any energy with, a person who absolutely does not register on your circle of what is important, among the things that you do? He plays soccer and some other thing, and he's a very good student. I have a feeling he's quite popular in the quote-unquote in circle. And I asked him, I said, Seth, isn't there such a person just in your high school, in your class? And I think it begins with sort of like, if you cannot see that person in your midst, people who are vulnerable, people who need some attention, people who need friendship, people who need someone to claim them. And I said, well, start with that person. Make some time for that person. Because I think that once you could see how your action can give a new lease on life, new happiness, new joy, new sense of security, new sense of belonging in another person, you have hope. And I said, you also need to reflect on all the people who brought such goodness into your life. And that goodness is not just for you as a recipient. In the end, it has to change you so that you could become a giver. And just like I said, the people who are working in this field, they're never the ones who ask me whether I'm depressed or not, or whether this work is futile. And I tell you, another group who never asks that question are the people you're helping. They never say, okay, you can give up on me now. This is a lost cause. You can move on now. You've done enough with me. Nothing has happened. Move on. People never say that. And in fact, one of the most sort of heart-warming, heartbreaking two things when people tell you is, don't forget us. They say, don't forget us when you leave. So coming back to this, I think hope begins with action. It begins with extending to just even one person you can see, and you could see sort of that incredible miracle. We know that God helps in how plants grow. We plant the seeds and then wonderful things happen. The sun, the rain, the nutrient, whatever good things that God does. I think that we have to plant those seeds. That action is about planting that seed.
Thank you very much.
By the way, I think that's also the work of Notre Dame and Holy Cross, is to engage people in some of that work with a sense of what that work is about. I'm also against people who pack resumes with trips or work in Africa. It's like everybody needs to have that box check. I did service work in Africa. But anyway, coming back, I think I did service work in South Bend. Makes a lot more, really impresses me more than I went to El Salvador and I developed a strategic plan in 1 week for them to become better. But I worked in South Bend, whatever it is, and I really tutored for, all the years I was at Notre Dame. I saw this person who went from not being able to read to being really excited to get into biology or whatever it is. But I think it's the work of Holy Cross to engage your students in this action, but also the way that you engage them is really the model for how they should engage others. And so I think that for people of Notre Dame, how you manage, how you work with your staff, the tone you have for problem solving, how you engage your students, I think all of those things are what young people need to see and say, in the world of the adult, this is real. I think when they say nothing, this is not real. It's just, I remember a student one time asked me, it was after an ethics talk, and he said, oh, Dean Wu, all these things about, you said about ethical behavior, and the speaker too, who came in and talked about that. Well, that person is at the top of the heap. The person is the CEO. What about those of us who are at the bottom, where we have to fight for oxygen? You know, there's not a lot of elbow room there. Is this something which is a line that you are giving us? Or is this something that really works? And I think that is the most important question. What really works? What can you count on in the adult world? Can you count on people doing things for the good of others? Or is this just a line? You know, when students say, oh, I'm really sad, I'm leaving Notre Dame now after 4 years, I'm afraid to go into the real world. And I thought, oh my Lord, we have failed. We have failed because we led them to believe that there is this little utopia called Notre Dame where if you walk out of the boundaries, boy, you could meet tigers and, wolves, and hyenas out there, and they're all waiting to take a bite of you. And that is the whole thing of where did we fail in helping people understand that this is not about an ethics within Notre Dame. This is what Notre Dame has taught, and be able to demonstrate about the ethics of the real adult world. That it is not perfect, but that there is sort of that capacity for the common good, and that our students are to join that. They're not out there waiting for people to take a bite out of them.
Thank you very much.
You can tell I'm not passionate about that.
One final question. In your story about Ernesto, you spoke about him as being a farmer who transitioned crops, became a teacher, I think, in the community, and then went on to raise children who were successful. And you described him as a leavening agent of the community. Someone asked, how do you see the Holy Cross priests and brothers that you've known and sisters act as leavening agents in the communities, particularly here at Notre Dame, but at other Holy Cross colleges and universities that you've worked with?
And by the way, I think Ernesto learned to do what he did because the program also led him through this. So change is very hard, but the people who take you into change, who accompany you, and who said, we are here as you learn, we are learning with you, you're not alone. And at first some support, which is investment, but in a way which is accountable, because the second year he was not getting free seeds, only the first year. So he had to generate enough at least to be able to buy his own seeds. So I think first of all, the ability to help people move into new situation, which is very scary, and accompany them as they succeed. But the second thing that was done was that Ernesto also learned to experiment himself. He was able to apply his knowledge, which a lot of times in international development work the last 20 years is that we shouldn't just think about ourselves to go there to give aid, which is a rather static thing. We are there to sort of cultivate indigenous assets. And that indigenous asset sometimes is in their knowledge, their knowledge of the land and so on. So I would say another thing that was done that with Ernesto, and Ernesto passed on to others, is this capacity to learn, to improvise, to improve, to find their own solutions. Like, we didn't tell him that, if you go into a greenhouse, you will have better results. That was something he came to learn. And then he was able to also help other people and develop the finance as well as the structure for how to do greenhouses. So it was not just him, it was not just him receiving knowledge, it was about him extending his own knowledge, which is a beautiful thing to watch. When you see people starting to sort of own the problem, and they don't need your solutions. They have their own, and come. And then he worked with his neighbors to do the same thing, and he made opportunities available to those other people. And so he lifted the whole community and helped them as he learned from us how to sort of at first be accompanied into change.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wu. If we could get a round of applause.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Bring hope. If you bring God, you can't help but bring hope. Bring God, hope follows. Thank you.
And we are so very grateful for Dr. Wu, for Carolyn and all that she has shared with us today, but most importantly for all the things that she brings to her own life and family, and the experience that her faith continues to guide her, as we can see, very, very passionately for. I would like to just make note, I had mentioned some of the co-sponsors, but there are others who are with us today that I am just so very grateful for, and there are some who will be joining us for different talks, pending their schedules. But I would like to just thank Tom and Anita Veldman for their presence with us, and all of those who make our work possible. And so I would like to just recognize and thank them for their presence with us today. Throughout the day, there will also be some members of our Baraka Bouts women's boxing team and Bengal Bouts, the men's boxing team, who have visited and worked with our missions and who work to support our missions, Baraka Bouts in East Africa and Bengal Bouts in Bangladesh. So if you are among us this morning, thank you very much. And then behind the scenes, Father Austin Collins and Chuck Lamphere in the Office of Mission Engagement and Church Affairs, along with Father Bob Dowd from the Provost's office, but also Corby Hall Superior, when we first started dreaming up this conference. And Michael and Benjamin from my office and I were trying to figure out what first steps were. We had never done anything like this before. They were all very instrumental, so I'm very grateful to them as well. And then some of our visiting CSCs, Father James Barassa, former district superior in what is now the province of East Africa. So thank you for being with us. And Father Pat Gaffney, who has served in various capacities over the years at Notre Dame, but is most recently the Vice Chancellor at Notre Dame University at Bangladesh, which just celebrated its 10th anniversary. So Pat, good to have you with us today. And Brother Paul Benarczyk, who is with us, a flying trip in and out, quite literally, but it's so good to have you with us, Brother Paul, as our Superior General, who will be speaking with us tonight as well. And we'll continue to mention more people throughout the day. Father Paul Coleman is with us this morning. He'll be speaking to us this afternoon as well, so we are looking forward to his talk. Friends, one of the things that was a good takeaway for me from Dr. Wu's talk this morning was just that sense of kind of being able to handle and manage statistics, but also the life experience. In much of the work that we do, people want to know, how is what we are doing affecting the lives of others? Graduation rates of our institutions throughout the world, and how does it help individual students? So statistics are important, and as Carolyn pointed out, it only tells part of that story. So being able to have these experiences with our community around the world and the students that are served there is so very important, and we are blessed. And I'm not sure if they are with us this morning, but here at this conference, we have 3 graduates from Holy Cross Lakeview in Uganda: Nicolette Zabuna, Emmanuel Epau, and Shakib Awayu. And they are very, very good kind of models and examples of the Holy Cross work throughout the world, but specifically at our institutions and high schools at Lakeview in Uganda. My friends, I have talked far too long, but I will be with you throughout the day. with you throughout the day. But please, if you have time, stay and enjoy one another's company, a little bit of the food, and we can continue the conversations this morning. But I would also invite you back, depending on your schedule, for our talk with Father Paul Coleman at 3:30 p.m., our Mass in the Basilica at 5:15 p.m., and then dinner between, and then at 7 p.m., Brother Paul Benartzik's talk as well. So thank you all. God bless you throughout the day. Michael, do you have some comments and follow-up as well? Anything else we need to know?
Dinner will be provided for the first 180 people who arrive tonight. We'll see how that turns out. But yes, dinner will be provided in this room, and it will be available right outside in buffet form.
And for all of you who are with us this morning, just a brief kind of visual thing. So Michael Jezewak is our Assistant Director for Community Engagement, and I'm so very grateful to him and his role in coordinating our activities today and our celebration. And back by the far door is Benjamin Valle, who is our Senior Project Specialist, and he is just integral to all of our understanding of the works that we are doing, the needs that come up throughout the world, and then those kind of project proposals and reports. But mainly, we are always working together and as a team to see how we can best serve the priorities of our institutions and communities throughout the world. So thank you, Benjamin. And recently joining us is Bridget, and if I butcher her last name, I'm not worried because it will be changing soon. Bridget Kazanowski, and she will be getting married in a couple of weeks, but she is our office coordinator, and it has just been a real joy to have her on our team as well. So I would just like to thank all of them at the beginning of the day for all of their hard work. And my friends, as we end our official time together for this talk, let us end with a brief prayer. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. God bless you all.